Welcome to the first virtual Livable Houston meeting. I'm David Crossley, the founder and senior fellow of Houston Tomorrow. Hope all of you are safe and you're all thriving in this amazing science fiction movie we seem to be living in. Many of you have attended Houston Tomorrow Livable Houston lunch meetings for years, and a few have been coming for more than 20 years. That long string of civic discussions was interrupted briefly on March 24th this year when we canceled the last Livable Houston luncheon with a safety first headline. Our speaker back then was going to be DavidFields, the City of Houston's first transportation planner. Today, we'll try to make that happen in this virtual communications machine. I'll let David tell you his philosophies and just note that he has over 20 years of experience, including award-winning plans for Washington, D.C., Cleveland, and Abu Dhabi. First, a few notes about this virtual machine we're in here. There's a chat function, so you can send comments and questions that would be answered later. And there's a raise your hand function, so you can get in line later on to ask a question or make a comment here today. Please save those for we will come to your questions at the end of David's presentation. And then when your turn comes, please remember to make sure you're unmuted, although Jay will take care of that. And I say all that was the confidence because my son, Jay Blazek Crossley, taught me those things yesterday about this. Jay directs the amazing and important farm and city operation that's saving lives in Texas by launching and pushing toward the Vision Zero program, now adopted by the Texas Transportation Commission, TxDOT, 11 cities, and 1 county, Harris County. Now TxDOT has a goal to end traffic deaths statewide by 2050, has adopted a system safety approach, and increased dedicated safety funding by $300 million a year for 2 years. Farm and City is the co-host of this event, and Jay will manage the flow for us, I hope. I, at the moment, cannot hear anything that is going on this thing, so I don't know what's going to happen to me, and I may be disappearing into the background at some point. But here we go. So, David, if you would please turn on your mic and share your screen with us. Thank you for coming.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to do this right now. And if somebody can nod their head if they can see my screen. All right, great. So thank you all very much. Close that out. I really appreciate the invitation. Now it's been a couple of months, but this invitation was actually one of the first I received when I got here and I started as Chief Transportation Planner. It was a really warm welcome that there were so many people interested in the work that our division does, my philosophy towards it, and what we would be tackling. So I really appreciate this opportunity. One thing I want to be real clear on, our transportation division and basically planning overall, nobody does this in a silo, nobody does this alone. We have a team and we all work together. You all probably know several of the people on the screen. These are the people who every single day for years now have been working hard for Houston as part of the transportation planning division. And my hat's off to them for everything that they've been working on today. And we'll go through some of it right now. The other piece that's also very useful is that even the city or the transportation planning division doesn't work in a silo. We don't work by ourselves. If we're going to get anything done of note, it is going to be a partnership with agencies, with our partners, with our peers. Here is just a limited select group of it. There are many, many more. And we appreciate that we can work together to get things done. So now I really want to focus on our mission and how we bring every project back. So we start with something very, very simple. Our mission is to provide safe and reliable transportation for all. Now, doesn't sound like that lofty a goal, or it does sound lofty, it doesn't necessarily sound difficult, but it is really important to start with a place that we all agree on. If we can do this, we make Houston a better place. And that is a very good starting point. But it goes a little bit beyond that. There is nuance. So really the goal is to help, is to help Houston be a great place to live, work, and play and to provide economic opportunities and high quality of life for all. Because really, transportation isn't about moving people. It is about getting them to the things that they need to do all throughout the day. And we're going to go back to this again and again during this presentation. We have three basic guiding principles, and this flows through every project we work on. It must start with safety. It must address equity. And it must help build and support our communities. So if we can focus on these things, it really helps tell us if we are spending our time wisely in the service of our community. I'm going to take a step back for a second. I do like to discuss with people what they believe streets are for. And for any of you who joined us for our Vision Zero open house, this was one of our polling questions, because it is really easy to not see the whole picture on here. So when we ask people what streets are for, the first thing they will always say is moving things. Generally, they'll say moving cars, but moving people, moving bikes, moving freight, and yeah, that is a big part of that equation. The next thing we hear very frequently is our streets are to store things. And whether right or wrong, we use a lot of it to store vehicles. More and more, we're using it to store bicycles. And okay, so that is a lot of what we do today. But now it's time to start opening our mind to what else streets can do for us. Streets can provide space for retail and restaurants. Because remember, a street is only what we say it should do for us. There's no law that says it needs to be for moving and for storage. We know already our streets are very, very often used for recreation, whether that's commuting or for actual health, whether that's in a pack or individually. Go out to just about anywhere, even the most remote corners, and you will frequently find people doing something other than just driving or just storing their cars. They're using the streets already for this. And this ties really nicely, specifically in Houston, to our connecting tissue in the bayous. And then even on a more basic level, our streets are where we start to interact every single day. You leave your home, and the first place you may see somebody else is outside your door, on the street, on the sidewalk. You go back into a building, you come out, you see them again. And this is actually what creates a community, when we can interact with people, and our streets play a vital function to remind us of our humanity and of our place in society. And so at the end of the day, our streets provide a whole range of connections. They provide social connections where we can look people in the eye, we can address them currently from 6 feet away, but we can still see them, and we connect mode to mode. We walk to a transit stop, we bike to a building, we drive and park, but that all happens in our space. So if roads can do all of these things, it is very, very important that we ask ourselves what we want our roads to do, because we can make roads do just about anything, but they can only do what we tell them. So if you work in a community that says we want to drive really fast and not stop a lot, we are going to build a lot of lanes. And if we say we want to keep that speed up, and even when we need to turn, we don't want to slow down very often, we're going to build high-speed slip lanes. And if we say we don't want a parking spot for everybody when they get to every destination, then we're going to build a lot of parking adjacent to it. But let's understand this. If these are the things we ask for, these are the things we build. And if those are the things we ask for and those are the things we build, we are never going to have this. These are two mutually exclusive things. And both are possible, but we have to decide what we want. The next thing we think about in our philosophy is, what are we trying to achieve? And very frequently when you talk to transportation professionals historically, they will talk about vehicle level of service. And I'm guessing a lot of people on the call here are familiar with the concept, but in general, if you're stuck at a light once, 2, 3 cycles, you have a very poor level of service. And if you can basically speed through without any delay, you have level of service A. But it's really interesting when we talk to other people, when we talk to economists specifically, they flip this equation. They say cars driving slow enough to look in store windows and lots of people crossing that street, which may slow them down even more, that's a level of service A. And a place where cars just zoom through and there's very little street activity, that's bordering on failing because nobody there is really going to get out and shop in those stores. So we can use a scale, we can use an evaluation to do anything. We have to decide what is important to us. We also have to decide how we are going to dedicate our space. And we know the amount of space can do one thing at a time. It can move things, it can be space for tables, it can be space to park something, but it can't do more than one thing at any one time. So let's figure out, if we're talking about moving things, how are the different ways we can move people? So every vehicle, every mode can accommodate a certain amount. Simple math, you can't shove more people into a car than you can fit, but you can expand the vehicle. You can provide transit. You can provide more space for walking. And each of these is based on the math, but how we allocate the space is up to us. So if we want to move 1,000 private vehicles in an hour, we can do that. But if we want to move 7,500 people in an hour, we can do that too. So what are we aiming for? First part is transportation is not the end in itself. Aside from some very geeky transportation planners like myself, most people don't get on a bus just for the fun of getting on a bus. They travel because they are going somewhere. They're going to work, they're going to school, they're going to play, they're going to pray, they're going to visit people, and it is where they're going that is important to us, and the travel is a means to that end. We also know that we identify our goals. It is our community, and what we decide is how we are going to plan. So it is not up for somebody to come and tell us, it is for us to figure out. And really, this is the role of planning, to help our communities ask those hard questions. What are our goals, and what are we willing to trade off to achieve them? And that is where transportation planning really comes into effect. So I wanted to highlight a couple of key plans that identify transportation-related goals, although when you read them, they don't always sound transportation-ish. In Plan Houston, we talk about equal access to opportunity and prosperity. We talk about healthy, active lifestyles and social well-being. We talk about thriving, resilient, and diverse economy. More recently, in Resilient Houston, we talk about improving safety and well-being for all Houstonians, increasing regional transportation choice. Okay, that one's specifically transportation. And we talk about advancing equity and inclusion. And although transportation is only named once in that list of 6, every single one of these are advanced by sound transportation planning. So I want to talk about some of our major efforts and how we bring it back to those goals. So the first one, the Crosleys are very, very well aware of this, and we appreciate all your assistance and encouragement, is our Vision Zero program. I'm hoping you have all participated, joined us for our first virtual open house in June, signed our Vision Zero pledge on our website. If you haven't, please go and do it. And very, very simply, no loss of life by traffic collision is acceptable. We have a commitment to ending traffic-related deaths and serious injuries among all road users in Houston by 2030, and that's pretty lofty. Remember, Houston is 670 plus square miles. That is a very, very big commitment for a lot of people that this city is dedicated to. We're going to prioritize safety and accessibility as we design and implement streets. And at the base, we're going to design for vulnerable road users who walk, bike, or use a wheelchair, because if we accommodate, if we design for them, then everything else can also work. If we start somewhere else, we don't always get back here. The next project is the North Houston Highway Improvement Project, I-45. And in the words of Mayor Turner, NHHIP is a potentially transformative project. And we're working with TxDOT, and it's their responsibility to design a project with positive impacts for the community, City of Houston, and the greater region. So the goals from the city's standpoint are a lot of what you saw before, about economy, about environment, about road safety, about preserving our neighborhoods, about our parks and green space, about making sure we can evacuate in emergency, minimizing right-of-way. And a lot of these are not transportation specific, because what we know is a well-done transportation project can achieve these bigger societal goals. And then the third piece that we're working on is the Houston Bike Plan, and many of you are participating in that as well. By 2026, we're aiming to be a safer, more accessible, gold-level bike-friendly city. And we're talking again about safety and access, ridership, all throughout the city, because these are the things a solid bike plan starts to improve our health, starts to provide opportunity, and it needs to be done safely. So all of our three major projects compared to those goals that you saw earlier about Plan Houston and Resilient Houston, every single one matches up to those goals, whether we're talking about access, whether we're talking about health, whether we're talking about economics, whether we're talking about safety and quality of life, whether we're talking about transportation, or when we're talking about equity. The work we are doing as a division at the city is to make those projects achieve the goals that the city has laid out. And successful implementation of those goals make the city a better place. And with that, I will take questions.
All right, thank you so much, David. If people know how to raise your hand, please feel free to do that. And just unmute yourself and start talking if that works for you. So we have a question in the chat from Betsy Peterson asking, how can we help other than taking the Vision Zero pledge?
Great question, we appreciate it. It's a really interesting time to do any type of planning right now because of COVID-19 and limitations to interact with people in person. We're doing everything we can to connect with people. So please take the pledge, please read the material. Oh, and I should mention, we're going to have a second open house in August, virtual open house, where we're going to come and discuss the initial actions for the Vision Zero plan. So join us, but do us a huge service and help the city by communicating with your neighbors, with your community associations, with whoever you deal with and talk with, and let them know about it. Help us spread that word. We have certainly the website, and we'll have the virtual open house. We have an email address and a phone number that people can call. We're trying to find any way possible so that people can get connected here. So if you speak with a neighbor and they're not particularly web savvy, we will call them directly. Just let us know, or they can call us. Help us communicate, and that will really make a big difference on how effective that plan can be.
Great. We have another question from Tom Thompson asking, David, what attracted you to Houston?
It's a really great question because I'll be very honest, it was not a place I had ever thought I would move to. I had done work across the country in different cities, a little bit of work here, not a lot. But when I started looking around and thinking about what I wanted to do next, it was right around when Mayor Turner had his Vision Zero initial task force press conference. Now, I'm not a political person, so I did some digging. I learned that this was not a political platform. This was not something the mayor had run on. He simply could not abide by the city allowing the amount of death and injury on the roadway network, and pledged to do something about it. And that was kind of the things I was looking for. A city that was going to say, we've done things one way for a long time and it doesn't do right by our community. We need to do it better. We need to do it differently. And we might need a little bit of help to do it. And I felt like I could offer that assistance. So the timing worked really well. And I mean, honestly, a city that is looking at Vision Zero, over 1,000 miles of high comfort bike facilities, and working on NHHIP all at one time, don't get much more transportation planning than that.
You certainly have an exciting challenge. It's good to have difficult work to do. We have a question from Catherine Vo. Privately owned sidewalks create accessibility gaps. How will Vision Zero and the City of Houston bridge the gap to create more accessible infrastructure?
You know, at the end of the day, accessibility is kind of the safety and accessibility are the two starting points for our transportation network. If people can't connect, if they can't cross the street safely, if they don't have a consistent accessible route, then we're not doing right by them. Certainly, the city's immensely current for everyone's walkable places ordinance and transit-oriented development ordinance, which I'm sure you all tuned in for City Council just a little earlier to discuss, is going to be a big piece of that. As things develop, they're going to be meeting a certain standard. But honestly, a lot of it is on our shoulders. As we redesign our streets, as we implement projects, keeping in mind that walking needs to be the starting point is going to make a huge difference in our networks. That includes the sidewalks, that includes the curb cuts, and that includes the crossings. And it's going to take a while, but the only way you start is by starting now. I will add one of my favorite pieces of guidance is an old Chinese proverb that asks, when is the best time to plant a tree? 30 years ago. When is the second best time? Today.
I wonder, just a tiny bit of follow-up, did council actually vote on the walkable places and transit-oriented development?
I wasn't able to stay on long enough because I was preparing for this, so I don't have the most recent update. I don't know if anybody on the call stayed there and could give us a report.
Could you give sort of the 2-sentence version of what those will do, or?
Sure. So 4 places that are part of the program. So for TOD, it is where rail or BRT would be located. For walkable places, that is an opt-in program that if, as a property redevelops, the guidance for it is more walkable, more focused on the frontage, less about the curb cuts or the vehicle access, with complementary shifts in parking and more encouragement of biking. So basically a new development form that really encourages the multimodal.
David, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thanks again for doing this and for taking this job. Thank you for that. So one of the things that seems extremely important to me that there isn't too much talk about is the idea of dedicated lanes. There is quite a bit of language in the Metro Plan about having dedicated lanes. And I think as we go towards autonomous vehicles and needing space for them to maneuver in without having to get into the regular traffic, what is going on in the discussion at both the department and the city about when we would declare that certain lanes in certain major thoroughfares are going to be dedicated?
So that's a big question. There are a lot of parts. I'm going to try to unpack that and kind of address each one. The first thing, as a professional planner, I've asked this question of everybody I know, and I get different answers. And I don't I don't know that anybody knows when autonomous vehicles are going to be prevalent. 5 years ago, it was going to be 3 years ago. 3 years ago, it was going to be by now. I believe Elon Musk just posted another something about it. You know, it's coming any single day. I'm hesitant. I don't believe it's imminent, but it's coming, and it's coming eventually. So, you know, the planning for it starts now. The next piece of that is for our city to be great and any city to really get the most out of autonomous vehicles. We need to go in with the understanding that replacing every person driving vehicle with an autonomous vehicle doesn't change our equation all that dramatically. Yeah, we could probably narrow some lanes. Yeah, we can probably get closer spacing between vehicles, so capacity will go up a little bit. But if all we're doing is trading the same number of cars for the same number of cars, it's not going to be a huge difference on our urban form, aside from maybe parking, because the vehicles wouldn't need to stay near you after they're done, they drop you off. But the bigger way that we're trying to think about this is, if we have that opportunity to look at our vehicle systems differently, how do we look at these as shared? So it is really just another approach to transit, but using a smaller vehicle, so that instead of each one of us driving individually, 4 of us are driving in one autonomous vehicle that's going to take us all where we need to go. And none of us have to deal with the ownership, the individual laying of funds or transferring money back and forth. And then we really get a different look at how much space we need. If we can go from 1 person per vehicle to 3 to 4, then maybe we need a lot less vehicle space. Maybe we can really have this conversation about, can we widen our sidewalks because we don't need as many lanes? Can we add more dedicated bike lanes because we don't need the vehicle lanes? And not that we can't do those things anyway, and actually we are, but it really starts to change that conversation because the numbers go dramatically in another direction.
Could I ask one little additional part to that? The idea that we will have dedicated lanes at some point seems fairly certain, and that perhaps the first vehicles in them will be transit and maybe emergency vehicles and delivery vehicles, and that in not very great distance of time, those will become autonomous. And so it's easy to know what their route is. It's easy to guide them through those spaces and so forth. But the big trick is just to declare, just to say, okay, Westheimer is going to have 2 dedicated lanes, or Richmond or whoever is going to have 2 dedicated lanes. And here's the map. The major thoroughfare plan, shows us where pretty obviously all those are going to be. What's the process for actually getting to a point where council says, okay, these lanes are dedicated on the map, and you can start designing your communities around them?
So one of the pieces of planning, so first I should say, everybody warned me, oh, don't go to Houston. Houston has no zoning. You're going to be miserable as a planner. And so, yes, there's no zoning, but there's plenty of planning. And, so my first explanation to everybody was, let's actually take a look to see what work has been done. So major thoroughfare plan, for those of you a little less familiar with it, is a layout of theoretically where all the roads go if everything gets built out, and what those roads are associated as, or designated as. It is a very, very useful planning tool that I think may not be used to its full effect, because we don't necessarily have the complementary piece of discussing mode for each of those designations. We basically just say the roads go here and we'll figure out lanes, we'll figure out what's going to go where eventually. So then I looked around a little more, and while it's part of the conversation, we frequently forget we have a transit operator that has done a lot of that for their mode. Metro Next lays out where the dominant, primary pieces of our transit network should be, and the region funded it last November. So, okay, so maybe now it's time to take that and overlay that onto the major thoroughfare plan. Okay, we also have a bike map that lays out over 1,000 miles of high comfort bike facilities. Maybe it's time we overlay that. And so one of the things that we're going to work on in this coming year is overlaying all of the different plans that discuss the modes and shaking them out. Does every individual mode claim the same street? Is it wise to have transit and bike and maybe freight all asking for the same space? Maybe we need to make some trade-offs. And maybe, you know, what I started with earlier about the role of planning to help with that, but we can't do it until we kind of overlay all of those on top of each other. So this idea of some communities call it a long-term transportation plan, some call it a multimodal designation plan. There are lots of names for it, but whatever it is, it's time we have that conversation.
Thank you. I agree.
Great. We have Robin Holzer has raised her hand, but then
Robin,
Raise my hand. Can you see and hear me okay?
I can.
Sometimes I get my technology all twisted and so it's better if you can hear me. So one of the things, first I want to say thank you for choosing David thank you, David, for hosting, and thank our other David for presenting, and more importantly, for choosing to bring your time and talent and invest it in our city. I appreciate the work you're doing very much.
Thank you very much.
As a longtime transportation advocate, I feel really excited to see the city making more and faster progress towards safe and equitable transportation goals. So it's a really exciting time to be in Houston and see what's next. And I loved what you just said about taking the MTFP and making it into a multimodal document. That's outstanding. That's awesome. Full speed ahead. Another great example that I want to give you guys kudos for is the city's new infrastructure design manual, which gives us new and better guidelines for planning and building walkable urban streets across our region. I understand that planning worked with Public Works and the Office of the City Engineer for months and months and months to give us new guidelines for street pavement and for street cuts and for traffic signals. And it's really exciting to see you guys not just saying we're going to take one project and make it better, but we're going to lay out the recipe for how every agency and every private developer in our city can be on the same page to make our streets work better for everybody. So massive kudos for doing that. The question I want to ask is that even in the face of all this great progress, sometimes our progress feels like it comes in fits and starts. And one of the things I'm hearing from community people is frustration over a decision that the mayor made earlier this spring regarding the Brazos Bridge. That TxDOT and the city had this bridge structure that was crumbling and that actually went offline for more than a year, and nobody seemed to mind that one link was missing. And there started to be real enthusiasm for a fantastic plan, or a really forward-looking plan from Public Works, to say, let's reimagine what happens in this part of Midtown and make a strong multimodal, a safer, more convenient multimodal set of connections between Montrose and Midtown, and also to make the streets safer for the people who are driving on them. And let's add some park space while we're at it. And it felt like just at the moment, hey, there's this new idea, and then it got taken away. And so my question to you is, if you're free to say, can you talk a little bit about, from the inside, what went wrong there? Or like, what is there, do you see a way that could have played out differently, so the next time we get an opportunity to really make a big decision, that the community can help make it turn out right?
Thanks. So I do want to start about the infrastructure design manual. In case anybody wants to read it, it was just updated, I think last week, maybe.
It's effective July 1st, and anyone who is submitting plans for review after July 1st has to use the new guidelines. There
you go. So, hot off the presses, but really the credit to that belongs to our partners at Houston Public Works. We were part of the process. They engaged us. We helped them a lot, but that was a heavy lift, and they did the heavy lifting there. And it is really wonderful to have partners on the engineering side that we can work with so closely that believe the same way we do. I'm sure many of you know folks like Ian Havlicek, who is wonderful to work with. Jeff Weatherford just left, which is very sad because I was looking forward to working with him. But what we know is they are very good partners, and not every city can actually claim that their planning and public works departments are of like mind. That was also one of the reasons I took this job, because of the relationship. So kudos to them. Separately on Brazos, so I wasn't here exactly when everything happened, and honestly, I don't have the details, but looking back on it, I'm not sure as a city we did a really good job doing what planners do best, by bringing in the community and communicating well and having a conversation about what the city is looking to do for which purposes. Those goals that I laid out, they're good words, but if you don't remind people of them and interpret them and bring people back to them, you can kind of forget about them, in the rush or in a reaction. And what we are pledging to do, and we've been trying for a long time, but we are really pledging to be that bridge for good community engagement and active participation. And we hope that won't happen again, that we can revisit and we can kind of re-engage. And I do believe that is how you get consensus around even tough projects. And so while we will always learn from what we did in the past, and that's when we will learn from, I think we can improve greatly in very short time.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, great.
I want to give Robin a shout out, because I'm pretty sure in just a little time she's going to another transportation meeting. You're going to BAC, right?
Of course I am. And if I can cross promote David and Jay, if that's okay, the Bicycle Advisory Committee meets quarterly, and it's all on the web now. And so you can tune in at 2:30 if you want to see what the BAC is up to this month.
Great.
Actually, can I do a triple cross promote? For anybody who has more time in your schedule, at I think 2 p.m. today, the city's Quality of Life City Council Committee is going to be hearing a presentation on converting off-street parking spaces for restaurants into restaurant space during COVID-19. And yeah, I'm going to jump from this one to that one. Robin, you'll be joined by Melissa at the BAC.
Super. See you soon.
So we have a bunch of questions in the chat.
Okay. And I can't see the chat, so I apologize. I'll need somebody to help moderate that.
I don't know if Melissa or anyone from staff is on. Just one of the questions was, is there a link to the August Division 0 open house? I just kind of looked and I couldn't find one. So maybe we can send it
to the June one, the one that happened, or the August one that's we're scheduling right now?
I guess they mean the August one.
Okay, no, not yet. Okay. We are just actually, and one of the things we're trying to figure out is what is the best time to get people. Everybody's a little bit guessing in the dark right now. At our last one, we did a 4 hour straight from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. And the majority of people really showed up between 4 and 6. So we're pretty sure we'll do something around that time slot, but we're considering, do we do 2 evenings? Do we do an evening and a midday? We're really not sure when to get people right now. So that's why we haven't finalized it, but it will be posted probably this week or early next at the latest.
Great. So we have a question from Kenneth Snyder saying, do you feel we have widely understood and agreed to goals for transportation in Houston, i.e. we're going to get what we asked for?
I think that's generally true, because we have gotten what we've asked for here. But I don't know that anybody has sat down to discuss what other options were available. So this was an article I meant to write years ago called the Lesson of Ramps and Rails, that if you build a lot of ramps, people drive a lot. And if you don't tell them there's an option to build something else, that's all they know, and that's what they continue to ask for. But if we have a conversation about all the different options, about capacity issues, about safety, about how your children can walk on the sidewalk safely and cross because we invest in it, when you start to lay out those options, and that's our role as planners and working for the city, more and more we find people say, yeah, I want some of that. That doesn't mean I'm going to necessarily never drive. Most people will. It's a huge place, but they want the choice. And if we don't lay out what those choices are, it's hard for people to kind of come to it by themselves. So a real honest and fair discussion is what our goals are and all the different ways that we can get there.
Great. Let's see. We have a question from Neil Ahart. The NHHIP seems largely designed to increase capacity for drivers traveling to Houston from the suburbs. Could we better meet this goal by instead building commuter rail lines to the suburbs? And how can we get a plan for long distance commuter rail?
So I'll separate those two. The first specifically about NHHIP. We are working with our partners at TxDOT to make this a project that increases travel capacity, not just individual vehicle capacity, but also improves connectivity for the neighborhoods that the road travels through. So designing frontage roads so that they service city streets, improving the transit access to those neighborhoods, improving the bike connectivity and the safety of that in that area. So there is a great opportunity, and as you heard from the mayor's quote, it is one of these once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, and that's why we're working so hard to get this more multimodal picture for it. Regarding commuter rail, I'm sure most people on the phone, on the line are familiar with Texas High-Speed Rail, which is moving forward as a connection between Houston and Dallas, which we're very, very excited about. Beyond that, that is kind of the first piece of rail that is kind of in discussion right now, and we would love to see it. It's funny because I get asked very often, what about regional travel? And when I remind people that Houston is 670 square miles, just getting to our city boundaries is regional travel. So we want to make sure that we can connect multimodally with the systems we have in place, and then we can start talking about kind of long haul outside.
Okay, great. Let's see, I'll do one more question and then see if there's a hand raised. From Susan Graham, can frequently used bus stops and routes be added to the TOD ordinance?
That was discussed early. I think what we wanted to do was get rail and BRT, my brain was slipping for a second, rail and BRT up and running so people can see what that would do. I think Metro's boost routes, which are in development right now, are a really great candidate for kind of a next step. And we'll be having those conversations as they move forward to see how we can link that with this. Honestly, I just learned that these ordinances were started under Pat Walsh. If people know the head of planning who tragically passed away a few years back, it's been a long conversation to get to where we are today. So, you know, sometimes we want to get a win and get things going, and then we can go to expand it.
Great. So let's see if I noticed David Hightower is unmuted. Is that meant as raising your hand? No. Okay. We have a comment. Just Mike Burns supports your use of Oxford comma, but also it would be great to see more pop-up bike lanes and safe street projects. So I guess there's not a question there, but.
We appreciate that support. We're trying every mechanism we can.
Letha Allen asks, related to accessibility is connectivity. Has there been any discussion about limiting gated neighborhoods, private streets, and also encouraging the reuse of existing alleyways?
That's a good question. I'm honestly not sure. And I hate to sound like I'm delaying an answer. I'm almost 5 months into the job, and every week I learn about something new that somebody is working on, so I don't have an answer for that one, but I'll take a look and see what I can find out.
Yeah, okay. Well then, here's perhaps another, I don't know if you'll have an answer on this one, but from Paresh Patel, has the city explored use of novel, sustainable financial instruments like green bonds for new unfunded transit projects?
So funding is the thing that is always on our mind, and it really doesn't matter the scale of the project. So at some point, there's a resource needed. We are always having conversations with our public works people, opportunities for grants, opportunities for different funding mechanisms, and cities go back and forth about different approaches. We're always learning from our neighbors exactly where we are on any one of those. I'd have to go take a look at. But certainly, if there is a mechanism out there that you think we haven't explored enough, please shoot me a note about it. And I should give my email address, david.fields@houstontx.gov. And just send me a link if it's that, or a quick note, and let us do some research and follow up. It just feels like there's always more to learn on it. One thing, if I can divert for just a second, we did try, and it brings the last 2 points together. We started our very first pilot for a slow streets project out near Eastwood Park, with the idea that during COVID, people were trying to be outside more. We wanted to use this opportunity to find streets where historically we'd heard that drivers that are not starting or ending in those areas were using cut-through streets and didn't need to be on those smaller streets. And we wanted to help people connect to something like a local park, so that they could be outside and maybe not feel like they would need to drive to a regional park that was getting overcrowded. So we have our about 1 mile of pilot slow streets that'll go till Labor Day. We're tracking traffic and different use. We have a ton of different comments from all sides about the value of it. And what we're going to do is take those lessons and look elsewhere. But bringing back to funding, we did this with a zero budget. This was not budgeted anywhere. This wasn't programmed anywhere. This was just something that Public Works and Planning got together and said, could we do something to test and see what we could do? So we spoke to our friends in our maintenance shop, and they said, okay, well, we've got a little bit of equipment we can use. We can whip up some quick signs, come up with a traffic plan, and let's see where we can go with it. So our pilot, unlike most of our major peer cities, was completely cost neutral. And we would love to do a lot more of it as we learn the best practices and where we should go. And we're going to need to figure out what we can do at very, very low cost and how much we would need to do or find if we wanted to do it bigger. So if you have neighborhoods that may be interested in having this conversation, if they saw the pilot and are having similar issues, please ask them to let us know. We're keeping a list of other neighborhoods that have reached out to us and said, you know what, we would love to have that conversation.
Great. And I'd like to ask a question talking about funding that, I think I'm most passionate about sidewalks, but really there's a whole, sort of to explain, in Austin, I'm part of a crew that's advocating for a $750 million safe and active transportation bond on the ballot this November, which might be next to a $4 billion transit election. But specifically sidewalks is a big element of that, and getting to the city of Austin's goal of $40 million a year worth of sidewalks. And in Houston, there's a massive need for sidewalks. And the old story is when the lawsuit happened, the ADA lawsuit in the 90s, the city's lawyers kind of used a stat that they figured out that the need was $2 billion at that time. And they presented that as, well, that's ridiculous. We'll never do that. And I think it's not ridiculous. And we need to be funding sidewalks at a massive scale. And so I just wonder what you think about the potential for funding sidewalks, and, will the voters of Houston be given the opportunity to decide to fund sidewalks anytime in the next 4 years, you think?
I think it starts a little bit before asking about funding, but identifying what it is, and all our different ways to do it. And a lot of that is going to come out of our Vision Zero action plan, which we'll release in September. And Jay's familiar with it, he's helping us with it. A lot of that is to say, if we are serious about this goal of safety and this goal of access, this is one of those components to it. And I think it actually goes back to the question about Brazos Bridge. If we can't tie those stories together, if we can have a narrative that says we've asked for our city to do this, we have to identify resources to help us do it, then it's not much of a conversation. Then it's just kind of a price tag. So I think we have a little bit of legwork to do to lay all that out and put that in front of policymakers and stakeholders and community members, and let those conversations and choices be made. So I think we're a little early to say, can we vote on it? And first start with, let's agree, we need to solve this.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, I think having a smart sidewalk plan is one of the most important things that the city needs to do. So I agree. So let's see, a two-part question from Tarana Hafiz. Is there an opportunity to re-envision our park and rides as something more than a parking structure, but instead as TODs? And then the second part is, can we incorporate revenue generating sources in our transportation network and hubs, such as advertising and retail, to help with funding the transportation system? And they point out things like advertising at train stations, or even the Virgin Miami Central train station in Florida, where the whole station is branded.
So I love this topic. This is actually my history. I used to work for a railroad, a commuter railroad in New York, Metro North, that went up to Connecticut and Westchester, and my job was station area planning. When I started, we were the parking department, I kid you not, because every parking space meant another rider, because it was free. And by the time I left, and I was not the head of the department, I was lucky to work with a great crew of people who realized that access can be made in many ways, and the best use of land around a train station isn't necessarily for parking. So this is a conversation that I believe in greatly, that our partners at Metro recognize. And as part of Metro Next, they're ready to start looking into opportunities to do more around park and rides than just parking spaces. And exactly what that looks like, we have to work together on, figure out what is marketable, what is still accessible, what does not create an equity issue by limiting access to transit. But together, I think we're really this is going to be an exciting topic over the next few years. On the funding and on advertising and things like that, I think once a community understands the value of transportation infrastructure and can parlay that, then the doors just kind of go wide open. Then, there are a lot of different ways to do it. And certainly, the more people who go through a station, the more valuable that land becomes. Advertising, it becomes an option. As long as, we are going in eyes wide open on the understanding on what that would mean. Do we want advertising on every square panel? That's a decision. But I think once it's not just parking, then the conversation's a very different place, and to me, a lot more fun.
Yeah. Which, something to note on that, maybe you've already seen it, but when Clark Martinson was leading the energy corridor, they developed a beautiful vision for basically making that park and ride into a TOD, and including a Vienna or Venice style bridge over the freeway and all kinds of beautiful things. And so I just want to make sure are you aware of that plan?
I'll need to look that up, or if you can send me a link, if that's not too much work, I'd love to see that.
My impression is it's basically been sitting on a shelf, but and there may be some, I think a lot of the sidewalk and sort of some of the safe elements have been done, but that the vision for a TOD, I think, is still sitting on that shelf, but it's a beautiful vision. So we have the final question in the chat from Steve Kokvar. What other U.S. cities do you think can serve as models for Houston's transportation vision?
I like thinking along those lines, so thank you for asking it. And what I try to do when I look at peers is say what individual lesson, even if it's not everything. So we'll take a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I think one of the ones I find fascinating is Charlotte, which has a small rail system, has a pretty extensive bus network, has a visionary planning director, and they are advancing this idea of, actually two ideas, one called 2TOD, transit and trails, to recognize that there's a lot of value, not just in connecting to their transit network, but also in their walking and biking and hiking networks. And they've invested a lot. And I think for Houston, which has some very comparable investment and love for the trails network, the Bayous network, there's a lot we can learn from there. I think Dallas is right now looking at TOD around their light rail network. They pretty much, just thinking about a broad brush, have pretty standard parking requirements even around their rail stations. And there, it's called North Central Texas Council of Governments. They did a study that I was part of, to be upfront, to say, without talking about the requirements, just what you built, are you using it? And the research showed they were overbuilding their parking at the place that they probably didn't want to overbuild it most of all, around their transit stations. So I think there are a lot of lessons for TOD for us that we can learn there. And then I look at the Vision Zero network, which has, you know, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of examples of different ways to approach Vision Zero. You know, and it has already changed significantly from when it first started. You know, you can look at the Scandinavian cities that in the 70s were very, very car-oriented and said, we need to make a change, and did. I also look at New Orleans, which is very, very flat, much like Houston, and has a series of very inherent bike routes that are side streets that are effectively bike boulevards. And they've taken this opportunity to say, with just a few tweaks, we can make this bike network even better. So I think a little bit of this transit, a little bit of this bike, a little bit of this approach, we can use all of that to apply to Houston.
Yeah, that's great. Sort of a funny note on the parking study concept. The Austin did a downtown parking management study. And the most amazing thing they found was at peak parking, with the most cars parked in downtown Austin, there's still about 25,000 empty parking spots. And that's when they have the most cars in downtown. So I assume downtown Houston is similar, that there's tens of thousands of basically extra capacity.
And I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I believe we're overparked. I don't have details on that. But I also think when we can communicate that in terms of dollars and space, right, it means a lot more to people. So, you know, we need to do a little bit of that homework to show the value and what we could do if we go in another direction, which I think was Austin's approach. Right.
And that's, you know, a key point there is that in general, in the development world, each parking spot comes out to about $15,000 or maybe $20,000. And so if you require 2 parking spots per housing unit, you're requiring $30,000 extra cost for every housing unit you want to add. And so that's a profound decision, that we want to add that cost to our housing in a growing region. So, I think we have reached the end of the questions. Although there's a follow-up comment from Charana Hafiz about the Park and Ride TOD, just that it's very exciting to imagine sort of a 24/7 energy at these spots, increasing safety around the parking rides. And so just excited by that proposal.
I think you've just like given a tagline to the energy corridor.
Yeah, 24/7 energy. Yeah. So I think it's time to turn it over to Dad to pull this all together.
While you're handing it off, I'll just make one last, if people have questions, want to talk to me individually, or have any follow-up for any of the things we've talked about, david.fields@houstontx.gov, and we'll schedule some time to talk.
Great. Well, thanks very much, David. This is very exciting. You can't imagine what it was like having this conversation 20 years ago and how different it is to have someone with your skills and your knowledge and philosophies in this seat. That's fabulous. So thank you very much. And thanks, Jay, for helping out here. And I understand my video is a blur. I started out not being able to hear. So I really like this format, and we will do this again, but I will try to learn how to be better at it at my end. August 26th will be our next meeting, and I think I know what it's going to be, but I won't say it yet. But you'll get that when we send out our next invitation. So thanks to every one of you for coming and for showing up, and we'll be happy to hear any comments you might hear. I think this format actually works really well. I'm excited about it. Thanks very much, and that's over and out.
Thank you all.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.